everybody. Welcome to the Sharpen podcast, brought to you by Acumen, a growth community for business owners and CEOs looking to get to that next level. I'm Dan Cooper, the CEO of Acumen, and today my guest is Sean Miller. He's recently moved from CEO to chairman of the Miller Group in Kansas City. So you can guess what we're going to talk about today: succession strategy, and especially in a family-owned business, and setting the table for this next generation. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. Happy to be here.
So this is a fun one today because there's so much in this, right? Not only succession, but also this family-owned stuff. But first, kind of give us a 1-2 punch of high level of the Miller Group, and then what do you do? Who do you do it for, and how did you get here?
Okay. So the Robert E. Miller Group is an insurance and employee benefits broker. And we focus our business. My dad started the business in 1961, and he only insured contractors. So we do a lot of insurance for contractors. We do their surety bonds, their business insurance. And then we expanded it. I added a not-for-profit practice 30 years ago. And so those are kind of two of our main lines. On the property casualty side, we work with manufacturers as well. And then on the employee benefits side, we do a lot of work for contractors and for nonprofits, but also for any business that has a lot of employees. So that's over half of our revenue. And again, we've been in business since 1961. And I transitioned the leadership of CEO to my niece at the start of last year. And so we have made a conscious decision to transfer the ownership and the leadership of our business within our family. And that really dates back to my dad. My dad started this business, and my brother and I came into the business almost 40 years ago. And my brother Matt came in about 3 or 4 years after I was in the business. And we worked together. And then one day, my dad came into our office, or took us to lunch, and informed us that he had cancer. And the doctors were saying it was terminal cancer, and he only had 6 months to live. Now, he went through, I think he did a second, third, and fourth look at that. And thanks be to God, the number 4 guy, and in my dad's view, he said he was a better salesman than the other ones. So he talked him into some surgery and some procedures, and he actually lived for 18 more years, which was a tremendous blessing for us, and for especially maybe for our kids, because they really got to know their grandpa. And that's important in this context because 6 of his grandkids now work at the Miller Group, one of whom is the CEO. And when my dad went through his cancer surgery, he came out of the hospital and he said, "Hey, I don't think God's going to care how much insurance I sell. So I'm going to start studying for the final exam." And he literally quit. He sold the business to my brother and me, and he stopped working in there. And of course, we lost a third of the revenue in the company. And so our transition is a lot more intentional than his was, because we do not plan to lose any business as a result of it. In fact, we plan to grow it. And so we learned a lot from that. But one thing that it did point out to us is that we've got a really rich history in our family with tremendous values that my dad and our kid's grandpa taught him. And as my brother and I were kind of stumbling our way through trying to run a business, because up until that point, we'd pretty much just been sales guys. But up until that point, we didn't really want to be involved in management. And in fact, we at the time actually started looking for people to partner with and possibly even sell the business. And my uncle, who was probably the most hard-nosed attorney in Kansas City, took my brother and I into his office and said, "Hey, I understand you guys are thinking about selling the company." We said, "Well, yeah, we don't really want to run a business and all that." He goes, "Well, let me tell you something." He goes, "I'm not sure this cancer is going to get to your dad, but if you guys sell that business, I think that's going to kill him. And if you guys sell that business, I will personally kick both of your asses." And I'm telling you, and he was the uncle that, I don't know if you got an uncle like this, but he was the uncle that I've been afraid of since I can remember. And so we just kind of said, okay, we're not we're not going to sell the business. So we went back to work, put our nose to the grindstone, and we went through all kinds of different iterations of how we were going to grow the business. And um, we ended up, and actually, this was through Acumen introduced us to Lencioni's organization, the Table Group. And so we engaged those guys, and they came in and they got us really focused on our purpose and our vision, mission, values, and and of course in Lencioni's fashion, he said you got to be clear about that, and then you have to over communicate it. You got to build it into all your systems and everything. And so that was probably 10 years ago. And once we did that, I mean, it was things really changed for us. I got personally involved in the hiring process. Nobody came on to work for the Miller Group unless I got a chance to talk to them. And our culture changed radically. And it wasn't just me. I mean, I think everybody really got on board with that. And as a result of that, since that point in time, we've been, every time we've participated, we've been a best place to work. We're currently the reigning champion of the 50 to 100 employees market of the best place to work in Kansas City. And we want to perpetuate that set of values. And I think we recognize that if we sold to a private equity group and those guys reach out to us all the time, if we merged in with another broker, they're always calling us too, those values are going to be gone. So, we want the values to continue, and we feel like the best bet for that is with our family. And so,
All right. So let's
I've
stop
been
there because
mentoring. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
there's a lot there. I want to start
Yeah.
like you said so much in like 4 minutes. So let's kind of back up. So your dad had 6 months. How long did that life live, man?
18 years.
18
Yeah.
years.
I'm pretty sure he outlived the doctor that gave him the 6-month diagnosis.
That's so they always say unplanned transitions comes from the three D's: death, disease, and divorce. So it's
Right.
cool to hear something that goes against that. So you had a tumultuous transition yourself. You and your brother had to kind of figure out, like, do we want to or not? You said, oh,
Mm-hmm.
after you got your butt kicked, you said, okay, we're going to do this. And then you did the thing. So you are now in a position to uh, be more intentional, as you said. And it sounds like there's two different parts to this puzzle. One is the leadership transition from you out of leadership, but then two is ownership. And those are
Right.
separate, which I think is a fascinating thing that you've kind of unpacked those two things. So let's start with the leadership part. Plus,
Mm-hmm.
you have there's more than one kid, there's more than one family in the business, so
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't make it very complicated at all, does it?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, talk about the leadership piece.
Yeah. So, and like you said, we've got six third generation Millers in the business. My brother has 5 kids in the business. I have one. And so, that brings all kinds of challenges along with that. And we kind of have a history of being salespeople. So there's a lot of sales genes in there. Um, my niece came on board over 10 years ago, and she did some sales, but I think we identified her as more of a manager slash leader. And so I kind of started giving her assignments to see how she would do. So the smallest practice that we had in our business was our personal lines practice. And it was kind of a marginal business, wasn't not a lot of revenue, did kind of broke even. So brought her in, let her work in there. We also had somebody that had been running that for a long time employee, who was kind of a problem employee, to be honest. And so Amber got involved in that. She increased the revenue by about 500% in about a 3-year period of time and made it into a profitable practice for the organization. She also had to let go of that employee. And she's one that will identify a challenge and then, will address it, so good for her. And so then we had another one of our practices that was we were having some cultural challenges in there. And I moved her out of private risk management, and I put her in charge of our benefits practice. And she knew nothing about benefits, nothing. And I said, well, you can look at it this in a number of different ways. In my opinion, it's kind of an advantage because you're going to have to depend on your team, and you got a really strong team. We had a lot of really, really capable people. And she did exactly that. And she made all the right moves. And that was a practice that was our biggest in terms of revenue, but was not making very good money. And she took that and grew it, instilled the Miller values there, and built the culture up. And now it's a very profitable, thriving practice. And I would put it up against any broker in the country. And we do compete. We compete with anybody in that area and win on accounts from 50 to 5,000 employees. So, the final frontier for her was where we started as a business: property casualty and surety bonds. And so she kind of moved into a little bit of a hybrid role where she was overseeing all of the service teams. I was still the CEO, but we kind of had a timeline on when I would move out, and I wanted her to have a chance to learn that side of the business too. So she got involved in that about 3 years ago, I think, and again did a beautiful job of transitioning that over. And she and I worked together to make sure she had a really good org chart underneath her to support her. We had to hire a couple of key people. We brought in some leadership, elevated one person on the benefits side who's done a beautiful job, and then hired an outside person to run property casualty who has also done a beautiful job. And then at the same time last year, I was intentionally doing less and less work on the leadership of the company just to see how she would do. I think it's important to kind of test people and see. And every time that I did that, she rose to the occasion, and really stepped up and made things good. I think she's a wonderful leader, and everybody respects her, which is important and challenging. I mean, when your last name's Miller at the Miller Group, sometimes people have a tendency to look at you and just think the only reason you're here is because your last name. And before we hired any of the Millers, and we also have a lot of other people that have family members working here. We've got fathers and daughters and fathers and sons and moms and daughters and sisters. And I will say, some people say they don't believe in that. I totally believe in it, because if somebody's willing to refer their family member to come work for you, they believe in what you're doing, and it builds a really, really, really strong culture. So anyhow, when we bring in a Miller, I have the Dutch uncle talk. Not quite as tough as my uncle had with me, but I talk with them about how important it is for them to work harder than everybody else, because there are some people that might look at you and think, the only reason you're here is because you're a Miller. Yeah, and I said, I don't want to ever hear that, and thanks be to God, I'd never hear that. And in fact, I have people all the time come up to me and say, man, what in the world did you guys do when you're raising your kids? Because these guys are unbelievable. But family businesses are tricky. I mean, you're growing a business, but you also got to manage the interpersonal relationships of a family. And, it's one thing to have my brother and me. There's two. Now we got six. And I've told Amber that, you got a tougher, and she's got cousins too. It's not brothers and sisters. She's got brothers, sisters, and a cousin involved in it too. So she's pretty proactive on how they manage. They meet on a regular basis, and, the communication, I think, is excellent. We're big enough that everybody has their own swim lane, which I think is important too. If you've got people that are kind of, getting each other's ways, that's a problem. So those are some of the keys, at least I've found, in the succession. And I've worked on kind of transitioning the business that I've handled as a salesperson over to some of the people there. My brother's still more active in business development, which is great. and as you know, Dan, I've moved into a growth catalyst role at Acumen, which has been great for me too, because I had to get trained as an executive coach, and now I think I'm a better mentor to Amber at the Miller Group because of that too. So and it gave me something to do to stay out of her way, which I think is important. I mean, I see a lot of guys, and we were blessed, I think, with my dad who didn't have control issues, and he literally, I think he may have benefited by having some control issues. It would have helped us retain some of his business maybe if he would have hung around, but he just like, I'm done, man. And
Yeah.
my brother and I are more like, let's, we want to transition it, but we want to do it in a more structured, intentional way. So we keep the clients that we have, and that it's not chaotic, and it certainly hasn't been. I think the transition's gone incredibly well. We've already gone through a year and a third, and last year's financial results were unbelievable, and we were selected as the top, the best place to work in Kansas City. We're a healthiest employer. Those are measures to me of how things are going. And one of the things my brother and I do still is we have a new associate orientation breakfast or lunch that we take them out to after they've kind of been on board for a while. And we had one just a week or two ago with a couple of new people. And oh my gosh, I am so impressed with the people that are working at the Miller Group now. It's just kind of solidifies my feelings that things are on the right track.
So let's look at that kind of best practices that you put into place. One, there's got to be some sort of mentorship. Two,
Right.
you're giving them new challenges. Three,
Mhm.
you got to identify high potential and right fit. Whether that's sales or operations, it's like, put
Right.
the fish in the water that they're going to swim in. And then, but you do have to move them around. So I think large
Mm-hmm.
companies do this very well. Like, I'm going to give you experience in each department. We have like this 2-year process. In smaller, mid-sized companies, that's a tough challenge. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something unique that you guys did well. And then you got out of being the hub, or one of the hubs in the spokes that you have, is that
Mm-hmm.
you relinquish stuff so you weren't in control. Um, that's cool stuff. So back up one thing for me. This, I don't need to be the leader, or I see the way path forward. There is the analytical side of all of us that like know or have it, but there's this heart side as well. So how did you know, when did you know that both head and heart wise you're like, you know what, it's time?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question, because we had a strategic planning session, and this would have been, gosh, five-ish years ago. Um, and so it was all our executive team and the Miller family. And we had this strategic planning. And at some point, I know it was our sales guy. He goes, "Hey, how big do you guys want to be?" So we had somebody that was facilitating the meeting, and she handed out cards and said, "All right, everybody write down where you want to be in 10 years. So we did that, and she put them all up on the board. And my brother came over to me and he goes, "Hey, which number's yours?" And he and I had the exact same number, and it was the smallest number on the board by a bunch. So that at that moment, I told those guys, I said, "That's why you guys need to be running this place, because Matt and I are at the point where growth just is more work, you know." And they're where we were 20, 30 years ago, where growth's fun. There we've opened up, and we've got several associates in Dallas now, and we're doing more work in Texas. We're looking at other parts of the country. They love doing that. I would never want to do that. I mean, I love our Texas associates are awesome, and but I wouldn't have done that. I mean, I'm pretty happy with how things were going. So that, when you say that, that was kind of honestly was a real turning point where I thought, okay, I need to really kind of get intentional about this. And I just think, I'm going to turn 65 here in another month, and I just feel like, the older you get, you lose energy and enthusiasm for some things, and I think you got to kind of turn over the reins. I think I'm a great mentor, and I've got some wisdom, but sometimes that slows things down. But I mean, Amber and I have a great relationship. If she's got something, she calls me right away. We have a regular monthly one-on-one that we go through. I look at the financials, obviously, and you know, but that was kind of a turning point.
That's a that's a fascinating like flag in the ground as an
Right.
indicator that things are shifting. And yet it takes a humility to not be like, well, but this is ours and we're going to do it our way for
Yeah.
however long. Um, okay,
Yeah, and
so
I
at
don't
that,
know what it is. I've told these guys this, but I honestly get more of a thrill out of seeing them win than when I was winning on my own. So, because I think it's an indication of how good we did in setting it up, and because I think the way that it was handed to us before was so clumsy that to see it going forward well, I get more excitement by that than I did about writing a big account individually, or having a great year when it was just Matt and me.
okay, so let's flip this switch to the other side. So leadership has transitioned, and there's a high trust factor. You obviously implemented the Lencioni model well because that bottom rung of trust seems to be thick
Mm-hmm.
and running well. Now there's just this small challenge of ownership,
Right.
and so there's a lot that goes into all this. Obviously, it's active today. So how do you think about that and where are you guys headed when it comes there?
Well, that's a great question, because we transitioned 1% to each one of the kids here, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And we did that in the way that my dad did it with us. My dad had an interesting approach because he valued our company at the time. And he said, okay, I don't need any money, but I want money to give away. So he gifted the business to my brother and me, and then we bought it essentially by making donations to his donor advised fund for the next 10 years based on his valuation. So it's a very tax efficient strategy because he never paid taxes on any kind of capital gain, and we got to deduct the purchase, if you will, every single year. So that worked out pretty well. So when
Pretty
we did
unique.
1% to the kids, we did it in the same way.
Hmm.
We've gifted it to them, and then they're making donations to our donor advised fund. The only thing is that's just with 1%. Um, our business is the value of insurance agencies is kind of insane right now, just because we're a 100% recurring revenue business. We can predict our client retention is north of 95%. We can pretty much predict what our revenue is going to be each year. We've got a good sales team that's growing it. Our margins are good. We would be a wonderful target for anybody. And so what my brother and I did is we pegged a value and said, this is kind of what we think it's worth. And then we're trying to figure out what to do, Dan, because at the end of next year, if we decide to make gifts at the end of next year, the unified credit drops significantly. So 2025 is going to be a big year for a lot of people that are transitioning businesses in the way that we're thinking about doing it. So we have not finalized that by any means.
Right.
And I'm not sure we're going to keep doing it the gifting way. It may be some blend of that and compensation. We may just go on some kind of a 10-year compensation agreement, for that, because honestly, they can't afford to buy us out. And it's a very, very tax inefficient way to do it if you sell it to them, because they've got to pay for it with after tax dollars. We've got to pay tax on the gain. By the way that my dad did it to us, we have no basis in our stock. So, it would be, a pretty significant taxable event for everybody. So we got to factor all that in, and we're really trying to figure out exactly how we do that.
Yeah.
But that's like the goal, the game plan for this year with Matt and me is really nail that one down. I mean, we're
Right.
committed to getting it to them within the next couple of years. It's just how fast. And one of the things that we did that was really interesting and very difficult, because I had a friend who had a business, and he had his dad and his uncle owned this business. His dad had 5 kids in the business, and his uncle had 1. Sound familiar? It's just like the Miller Group. So what happened was they had it set up so that each one of the 6 would get an equal share in the business. And at some point in time, his uncle decided, no, I'm going to give my kid all of my stock. And then the dad and the uncle, end up in a lawsuit. The uncle takes his kid, goes, starts a competing business. They end up in a lawsuit against each other. They never talk to each other until the rest of their lives. Took it to their graves. And 2 of the nicest men I've ever known, too. And my brother and I have talked about that a lot. It's not going to happen with us. And one of my best friends is actually had been the president of that company. And I talked to him and I said, well, how would you do it? And he goes, I would have the ownership be equal. So we've determined that that's how we're going to do that, which requires of me at some point to share my ownership with my nieces and nephews. So I'm planning to do that, and we're going to keep the ownership equal amongst the business active kids. The kids that aren't in the business can only have 5% ownership. We've already determined that. So that was kind of a long, interesting road to kind of figure all that out. You can imagine we've talked with consultants, we've been with psychologists, we've done it all.
I was like, who's on your deal team because obviously this is a sophisticated strategy and there's a lot of moving parts. So who is on this deal team just from a structure, like which pieces of the puzzle do you need in order to make this go?
Well, so you've got your accountant, you've got your estate planning attorney. There's our bank, UMB, actually has a guy they brought on board that specializes in exit planning. And so his name's Fletcher Brown. And so Fletcher we engaged him and spent the better part of last year kind of putting this all together. So we just had a meeting recently with the 3 of them. So Fletcher and our estate planning attorney and our CPA. And so now we're kind of in the home stretch of really bringing it all together. So yeah, but it's a lot.
It's definitely a lot. And one thing that you did well is you started early.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh,
So
we've been
how
working
long?
on this
Soup
for
to
5
nuts.
years. 5
Yeah.
years easy,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, because when I see these guys that are in their 70s and they don't really have their exit plan, I'm like, oh my goodness, man, you are in trouble.
So, all right. So we've done leadership and ownership. I have a bonus question for you that you don't know what's coming, but I do want to ask this. So any other tips for people running family businesses to consider like in the transition process? Is there anything like that we haven't talked about that you're like, ooh, make sure you think
Well,
about this?
I would say one really, really important thing is to maintain relationships. You've got to maintain, and it's not like you're going to be everybody's best friend, but I think you need to know each other well, and you need to meet regularly. My brother and I get together every week, so we have an hour meeting schedule, and there's times where we're out of town or something like that and it doesn't happen, but he and I have that, and we'll go out and play a round of golf every once in a while. And I just think that it's very important to maintain those relationships. I kind of think it's important to when you're getting together as a family, like for holidays and that you don't talk a lot about business. I mean, we're at the office enough that we can do that. I also think it's important that you're not tripping over each other. We've tried not to have siblings reporting to each other. Sometimes you can't avoid that. You mentioned something earlier about people, doing jobs. I had a really interesting situation. My nephew came on board. He had been an engineer at Burns McDonnell, probably the smartest guy in the family, and he came into sales, and it was challenging for him. I mean, sales is a lot different. And we had an opening on our benefits practice with our actuary, and he stepped into that, and he is killing it. I mean, he's brilliant with spreadsheets and numbers and all of that. And so I think that's one of the benefits of growing, is it provides a whole lot more opportunities for a lot more people too. So that's where you have to get to a certain size, or else, unless there's just one family member in there. But yeah, I think communication, keeping your relationships good is critical.
Okay, so you've dripped some things during this conversation, and so um, acumen's about plain glass before stained glass. It's people,
Mm-hmm.
performance, and profit, and yet how you make decisions matter. And so faith and somewhere on the Jesus journey is important to us. You've
Yeah,
said the words "Lord willing," and you talked about how your dad in the very beginning is practicing for the final exam.
right.
Uh, and so faith is a very important
Yeah.
part of the Miller Group. So, and yet, and you do it well, and yet still run a for-profit company. So, this is probably a whole nother podcast, but I'm asking anyway, like, how does faith integrate into this business thing you do?
So the purpose of the Miller Group is to serve others for the greater glory of God. So anybody out there that went to a Jesuit institution of any kind would recognize we don't use the Latin ad maiorem Dei gloriam, but
AMDG.
here in
Yeah.
Kansas City, if you walk into the lobby at Rockhurst High School, that's what you see right there on one of the pillars, AMDG, and that's what's on my dad's tombstone.
Mhm.
AMDG ad maiorem Dei gloriam, for the greater glory of God. And it's just got his name and his date of birth and when he passed away. And that's pretty much what he did at the end of his life, is he just looked for opportunities to help people and to serve others. And that's our purpose. And we recite that, I mean, we did this one time. And then the second in our values is that we place God, family, and community first. So my dad was from that generation that placed God, family, and country first. So we
Mm.
have God, family, and community. It's literally on the wallpaper in our lobby. And we kind of tested it a while ago in one of our all associate meeting. I said, "Hey, what do you think, the Miller Group's all about?" And we just gave 3x5 cards out to everybody in the company. And I mean, to a person, they were writing service to others, God, family, and country come first. I mean, that was all they said. And so when we hire people, we're very upfront about that. We're like, hey, we pray at the beginning of meetings. This is what we're all about. We've got Bible studies. I mean, and they're all voluntary, but if this is not, if you don't like that, you really shouldn't come to work here. And we had a guy early on in this that quit, and he said, I just don't fit in here. He was kind of a younger guy that was still out partying and all that, which is fine. But he said, and he goes, oh, by the way, you can't pray. That's against the law. And I said, well, not really. I mean, this is a privately owned business, and I don't know if I told him this, but I felt like saying, look, if you're upset because I'm praying for you and your family, we got some other issues here. Because and it was funny because one time my wife said, are you worried about people getting upset about your prayers? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, the guy that likes my prayers the most is Jewish. Uh, and I've had him lead us in prayer too. So, faith is a huge part of, and, Dan, my brother and me, we're not the sharpest irons in the fire. So we need all the help we can get. So we lean on the Lord quite heavily.
My goodness. Thank you for unpacking that because that was an important piece of your puzzle as you talked about it. Okay. How are you sharpening, challenging, and inspiring yourself currently? What makes you a better leader in person right now?
Well, again, becoming a growth catalyst with Acumen has done that for me because I've had to learn all kinds of new stuff, from how to be an executive coach to a lot of the technology I need just to put one of the monthly councils together. And I still the guys, I'm the oldest guy in the group by 10 years, and we got a lot of millennials in there. So when I'm setting up the technology and it's going badly, they don't just jump right in and help. They just laugh at me. But but then they help me. But that's really been great, and it's given me an opportunity also to I've been challenged. The bishop in our diocese asked me to help him out with some fundraising initiatives, and I was able, thanks be to God, we were able to really raise some significant funds for the schools in our diocese. So it's been really a lot of fun. And one of the other guys in Acumen, he said, when you're looking at things to do afterwards, don't just, kind of consider what options you've got and think about it for 5 or 6 months. and but look for ways that you can add value. And I feel like I am adding value to the lives and the businesses of the business owners that I work with there. I think I'm adding value for Amber, and I'm helping out in the community because I don't know all of their businesses, but I know a lot about business, and I can kind of help them work through the challenges that they've got. And plus, it's a blast. So I'm having fun doing it.
Well, you added value here today too. Tell everybody where they can find out more about the Miller Group and more about you.
So you can go if you just Google Miller Group, you'll find us. So our website is millercares.com, and anybody can give me a call too. I'll give you my mobile. It's 816-686-9046, or you can email me at seanm@millercares.com.
So I can't wait to try this. That's either the best idea I've ever heard or the worst idea I've ever heard. We will find out soon.
Right.
We will find out soon. If you're interested in becoming a member of Acumen, you can go to acumenimpact.com and click on the apply button. Or if you'd like to learn more, we have a ton of great content on the resources tab on our website. Sean Miller is a blast. You're a blast. We'll do this again. We'll pick another topic and unpack some stuff. Thanks, man.
Sounds great. Thanks. Bye-bye.